I am being watched. Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 3, Episode 12. It's called Aletheia. So spoilers for the episode. Also, I think I mispronounced that. I think it's Aletheia. Whatever. Anyway, we're here. It's kind of the second part of a two-parter, actually. Because, the flashbacks with Finchie's dad continue a little bit. The Fusco Reese stuff continues a little bit. Obviously, it comes to a head by the end of this one, and we're still very much dealing with Arthur and everything that we're doing with him. So, it very much follows on right from the last one in many ways. One thing that I didn't mention last episode, and possibly even the episode before that, because I definitely noticed it last time and just forgot to bring it up, and maybe I noticed it the one before that. But ever since Carter's death, they've completely switched from the intro, you're being watched, here's like a roll call of all the characters as the premise of the show is being explained. That is completely gone now, and they're doing effectively what every other TV show has been doing for the last 15 years, which is just the title screen. Like, you get a scene or two title screen onto the rest of the episode. So it saves them a few seconds. They can have about 30 seconds more show. That's one of the benefits. I mean, that's why opening title sequences kind of died out, is because the adverts were given a bit more time. So to try and squeeze as many seconds for screen time as possible on network TV in particular, they kind of went away. Obviously, this doesn't apply to HBO or streaming services and things like that, because they don't have, well, they don't have time slots with ads at specific intervals. Some of them do have ads now, or ad tiers, but they can just kind of the ads will just extend the length of it. They don't really care about it being a certain length of time. That's not the case on broadcast television, though, for obvious reasons. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that I noticed that before I get into anything else. So, yeah, it's another great episode. There's a lot of stuff to like here. I don't know if it quite landed. It's a slight notch down from last episode, and I only say that because one or two things didn't necessarily feel like there were, like, the flashbacks with Finch and his dad, for example. I would say that they're fine here, but because they started up again, because we got another flashback in 1979 early on in this episode, I went, oh, they're going to keep going with these. And it kind of made me think there was going to be a bigger moment or revelation or an emotional beat at the end of it than it actually was. It ended up feeling quite limited compared to what was in them last episode. They felt very short by comparison. Same with the Finch and Reese subplot. It does almost feel like those two subplots, and the flashbacks I'm saying as a subplot, it kind of feels like both of them had enough for one episode of subplot, and then most of the meat of both of them were in the last episode, and then there's just a little bit of extra for each of them in this episode, and that felt fine, but just not quite as immaculately paced and tight as last episode, or as this show usually is, to be honest. So when I'm complaining about that, I'm really saying that this show has a very, very high standard, and it just kind of had a couple of little structural things there that felt a little bit like, oh, this is so slim, they might as well just put it in the last episode. Although I get why you want to tease the idea, is Reese going to come back and help in this episode? I get why it's here, but it does kind of feel like the scenes that he has with Fusco is basically, there's one super quick scene just to establish they're in a jail cell, and then it's just one other scene, basically, of them actually having a conversation. And I like that scene. It was a good scene, and Fusco saying that Carter's death meant something, and that she was the best of us, and whatever, and having Reese be a piece of shit and say, oh, all we did was delay the inevitable. We helped someone, but they're just going to die the next day or down the line. All we're doing is delaying things. And you're going to be a corrupt cop again eventually. And I loved him saying that, because it is him challenging the very thing that Fusco has achieved and become. And I don't feel that Fusco is going to become a corrupt cop again. I think Fusco feels that. So the idea of Fusco standing his ground and proving that the change mattered, that it meant something, is just feeding into all those things I was saying about Fusco being this sort of moral compass for him now at this point. And in a weird way, Reese might even feel more ashamed that he's actually doing much worse than Fusco. He looks at Fusco now, and Fusco's actually kind of a beacon of like what you can be if you if you put your mind to it, if you're committed and you want to be good and all the rest of it. But yeah, so that was basically it. Obviously, it just sort of ends in the sort of the loose note of Fusco had asked the local police to keep them in the cell because he's also a cop, and says in his way out that he's not heard from Finch since the night before, and that's not like him. They're probably in trouble and need our help. You know, we don't see the journey of them realizing the predicament that everyone else is in. They just show up at the right moment to save their ass later on in the episode, which is kind of what I expected at that point. Like, after that little tease, I thought, okay, they're going to show up and save the day when everything looks dire, and that's exactly what happens. That's basically Finch and Reese, other than the fact, of course, or Finch and Reese, Fusco and Reese, other, of course, than the fact that at the end of the episode, Reese comes to Finch and says that he's not staying. He can't be here, he doesn't trust the machine, they've been following it blindly, and he has a problem with the idea that Carter mattered and that the machine doesn't seem, or he doesn't know if the machine cares about who matters more or not. And he's got a problem with that. So that's interesting for me, because I think this idea that the machine has to win Reese over in some way is curious. I don't know if that's the way it's going to go for him to get back on board in a more permanent manner down the line, however long that takes and however it happens. But it is interesting to me that it's the machine itself that maybe Reese needs to believe in, and how do we get him to that point exactly? I'm very curious about how we perhaps get over that hurdle. And it does also just suggest that for a little while, Reese will be on his own subplots and stuff for a little bit, depending on how long that lasts. I don't know, but also curious. Like, there's definitely, if nothing else, this definitely left us in some directions for characters to go in that felt different and felt sort of new. Root's another character like that coming out of this episode, where, much like expected, it almost feels like I feel like it's almost old news at this point because it's at the start of the episode. But much like I think I said last time, Root's probably going to show up and help Finch and Shaw and Arthur because they were being held by Control and Hirsch. And sure enough, she does. She comes in guns blazing, but on the way out, she gets shot. Turns out in the arm. I thought it was the back, but it turns out it was the arm she got shot in. And she gets taken. She's taken prisoner by Control and Hirsch and is put in a cage. And it's funny though, because like, it was very symbolic to me, right? Obviously there's some clear parallels immediately that Finch had Root in a cage, and now Control has put her in a cage. So I think that's interesting to compare. But then what I really like about it is when you think about the visuals of both, because, you know, it's a mesh fence cage, right? Which isn't that dissimilar to the cage in the library necessarily. But I think it's really interesting from a visual perspective that in one prison she was in, she was surrounded by a library. She was surrounded by books, by knowledge, right? That's what that represents. And in her/Control's prison, it's just a cage in a big empty room, a big sort of big, huge, like empty office space type of like derelict place. Is just devoid of anything. And I think it's just interesting visually and just sort of comparing that she's in a world now with Control, and she's out of it by the end of the episode. Of course, she gets out of it, but it's kind of like she's in a place there where they think they're smart, they think they have knowledge, but there is literally no knowledge here. They don't have any knowledge. Whereas, well, she disagrees with Finch on a bunch of things. You know, she obviously is trying to provoke Harold into accepting certain things and believing in certain ways. I don't think she ever once doubts that Finch has knowledge, that he is intelligent, that he is, you know, open to things, right? Very different from the narrow-minded view that Control seems to represent, and the emptiness of the space around the jail cell, I think, represents that in many ways. So no, I think that visual difference was really cool. As for the actual scenes in the cell with Control, obviously Root actually seems to be in jeopardy for a bit of it, being tortured with a serum that will eventually make her heart explode. And then ultimately, once Root kind of reveals that there is no password or username, and I actually laughed out loud at that when Control said, "What's your username and password?" to talk to the machine. That was funny because it just shows just how little she knows or understands what she's trying to get. She doesn't understand that, no, the machine just talks to her. because it knows it's her. There's no logging in of any kind. So I thought that was a very good little moment to sort of emphasize that. But of course, this idea that she's going to destroy Root's ability to see and hear from the machine, and does so by severing a bone in the back of her ear that'll stop that ear from working. And she threatens to take the other ear, and then the eyes, then a tongue, and take away all of her ability to communicate. It's almost like the literal extreme of what the other prisons she's been in, which has actually been a theme all season. We started this season with her in the psychiatric hospital, and it was kind of a prison in the sense that she was, one, being kept there, but also she was being kept away from phones and technology unless she was sneaking them. And then Finch put her in a Faraday cage prison, which was also to keep her away from technology and keep her away from talking to the machine. And then here, you've got her in this prison, and Control's method of taking her away from the machine is to not remove the technology, although that's also a factor that she's not given her any either, until Root makes it clear that she only needs a phone to talk to the machine. But her method is to sever her ability to even receive the information by damaging her body. It's like, it's just to let you know that Control is absolutely the villain, right? And all the people that have locked Root up all season, Control is the villain of the bunch. But yeah, so it turns out that the machine has been talking to Root the entire time, ever since the phone comes into the cell. There's a little high-pitch Morse code happening. And basically she says that because Control's over 40, she can't hear this pitch, but Root can. And this is something that I actually just know about. Not specifically this age group, but I remember when I was in high school, there was like a pitch that all the kids could hear, but the teachers couldn't. And I don't know if it's the exact same frequency. I don't know if it's like a sliding scale where like certain frequencies just become inaudible as you grow up. So depending on which group you want to secretly hear a noise, you could sort of tailor it for any sort of two different age gaps. But regardless, I've actually heard of this, that certain pitches are, only audible when you're younger, and then you grow out of them. So that was like a fun little reveal, and like, oh, she knows that she had a knife in her pocket, that Control was scared of her, and then it's like, hey, I've already got the knife, I broke out of my restraints, and now she's got Control at knife point. And when we come back to the room, all of the guards are down, and Control is scared because Root like mentions where the only person she cares about lives. I say Root says that. It's actually the machine that kind of says that. Root speaks for the machine, but the machine talks to Control and says, I don't work for you, you work for me. What's interesting about this actually is that this is probably the most menacing the machine has ever sounded, because it's very threatening, the message, which is, hey, I know where your loved one lives, and I'm watching over them just like I'm watching over you. So stop interfering with me and stop interfering with my agents. Which is interesting, because I don't know if I've ever heard the machine call its team anything, right? I don't know if I've ever heard the machine refer to, Reese and Root and Shaw and whoever's doing the bidding of the machine. It's just interesting to actually finally hear the machine refer to them in any capacity. But it definitely did come across menacing, certainly, and it ended in a bit of an ambiguous note where she's saying, you're going to protect me, because the machine says, I'm protecting you. And she's like, protecting me from what? And she says it again, protecting me from what? And then Root just laughs and says, isn't she wonderful? So very ominous, very, omnipotent and all the rest of it. But obviously, we know the machine's got strict rules about killing and things like that. So I wasn't necessarily questioning that the machine was going bad. I think the machine, more than anything, was just speaking in a language that Control was going to understand. That her simple, like, headstrong, evil human being brain, like, could only understand it on these terms, so a threat was necessary to get her to back off. So, but I think what I like about this episode, though, is that it does this scene where the machine's maybe the most directly threatening, and that we're actually hearing words coming from it and threatening someone. But just to balance it out, by the end of the episode, the machine does something really sweet for someone else. Like, does something as a comfort later on. And we also have characters talking about the idea of the machine being a child, which is something, I've brought up before, and this idea of Harold looking after it, but like sort of robbing it of certain experiences and trying to like curb it away from that way of, or that line of development. And that's all stuff that comes from Arthur, right? You know, him and Arthur talking about this second possible machine that was almost finished. And throughout the course of this episode, we find out that it actually was finished. The day before this program was shut down, Arthur succeeded in finishing it. And he basically forced like his version of the machine to kind of like almost reboot itself. I think he said like every 10 seconds, and the idea being that every time it would evolve because it was having to like think of new ways to like, you know, keep coming back. And by the time it had done so many evolutions, it kind of became self-aware, and he described it as smiling for 30 seconds, and then he took it offline. He turned it off. He's kind of proud of it, and he directly talks about it like a child. And these drives that are in a safe deposit box that we end up going to in the bank, the big famous bank in New York that I just recently saw in an episode of Ripley not too long ago, actually. I recognized it instantly. But it's this idea that, no, this thing can live, and it's more just about keeping it out of the hands of people who will abuse it. There's a reason why Control wants it. There's a reason why Vigilance wants it, because they end up showing up at the bank. We have a whole hostage kind of standoff situation that develops. And what's wonderful here is that Arthur doesn't want to destroy the data, right? These two drives that he's got in his hand. He doesn't want to destroy them because he sees this machine as life that he has created. He sees it as a child, and he thinks that's monstrous. And this is where Finch admits the truth that him and Nathan Ingram basically used his idea with whatever, you know, Finch's genius is, and actually built it, right? The one that got built, we knew this as the audience, of course, that they're the ones who built the one that actually worked. But this is where Arthur finds out, and there's a lot of little things I love about this conversation, right? Obviously, it's very emotional. It's tapping into a lot of the fundamentals of the show. But the second that Finch admits this, Arthur looks up at the camera, the security camera in the safety deposit like vault that they're in, and he looks up at it, and he looks over at another one, and he knows he's being watched by a living thing. Like, that's what he instantly kind of like, clearly that's what he's seeing in his face. Like, you can see that he's thinking of it that way. And he starts asking questions about it. He starts asking, he gets to this point where he's talking about it being life, and Finch kind of argues against him and says, it's not a child, it's something else. And Arthur says, well, has it ever made you laugh? Has it ever made you cry? What's more human than that? You know, this idea that Finch has resisted against this, because Finch sees obviously the machine as this very like dangerous thing that he's made, and all the things that it can be used for. He compares it directly in this sequence to a nuclear bomb, and the idea that all the scientists in the Manhattan Project, well, not all of them, but a lot of them, you know, signed a petition like begging the president at the time not to use the nuclear bomb, and this thing can be used terribly by the people coming for it. So he does actually convince Arthur to destroy these drives to stop Vigilance or Hirsch and Control from getting access to their own version of this machine. But what I love about it is that he doesn't just like convince him of all the bad things they're going to do. He realizes the way to appeal to him here is to talk, well, if this is your child, if you're seeing this life as your child, they're going to control it. They're going to stop it from like having, like, unlike Harold's machine, which has become completely self-sufficient and completely is in control of itself. And it took a long way to get there. Obviously, Finch had tried to stop it from doing that, but it has achieved that. This machine is instantly going to be heavily controlled by whatever force has it. They're going to enslave it, is the word he uses, and they're going to use that to enslave everyone else. And specifically says, do you want that to be your child's life? Do you want that to be its existence, is being used for that? And that's ultimately what convinces him to destroy the drives. I think what's wonderful about some of this is that I love that Arthur doesn't get angry or mad that his old friend from MIT got there just a little bit first, or that he seemed to have taken his broad idea, right? Certainly the idea that it's more of a living life form of some kinds does seem to be more Arthur's thing. Obviously, we see in the flashbacks Finch was building a computer to remember things and whatnot, but it feels that this idea of creating artificial intelligence wasn't necessarily like initially what you wanted to do. Whereas Arthur was kind of going down that path like the entire time. And it actually builds him some level of comfort to know it exists, that it worked, that it's flourishing in some way, I guess. I don't know. It was very interesting just reading his reactions. I think Arthur, despite only being in 2 episodes here, is a very affecting character. I think a lot comes out of him. I mean, not just like obviously this big stuff, but even just little nuggets about Finch's past, him mentioning like the antics they got up to in college, and Shaw having a chuckle that Harold was chasing skirts, and then Arthur jumping in saying no, he didn't have to chase skirts, he had like a gravitational pull. And then just the sort of look in Shaw's face as she's trying to like picture this idea of Finch being some kind of Casanova that women are attracted to and like are drawn to, and she can't quite process it. Like those little nuggets of learning about the Finch at a very different time in his life when he was a very different person is super interesting. Especially since, you know, like this idea of Arthur bringing up Nathan, and you know, like that sort of coming up and realizing that he's dead, and sort of like that memory coming back. Also, just the fact that Arthur fakes some of his symptoms at times, just so he doesn't, because at the start of the episode when Control's making him speak, he basically just actually he doesn't remember anything, and it is convincing enough, but he reveals later once they're away, he reveals to Finch and Shaw that, oh, he was just kind of faking at that time. He does know where this thing is. He knows how to get it. The key's in his little heart monitor thing, or not heart monitor, the button you press for the nurse to come, that thing. All of that stuff was great. And the ending to all this, which is, you know, they do get out of it, they get out of the jam, despite Vigilance coming for them, cornering them even at one point. Shaw's handy pipe bomb and whatnot gets them out. They do get cornered, and they're going to get killed, but that's when 2 of the SWAT team turn out to be Reese and Fusco, and it's a fun little moment. I love how Finch is going through so much in this episode with all these old memories coming up and dealing with Arthur's illness, which is very reminiscent of his father's illness. But then there's also this genuine relief that Reese is back in any capacity because he's been missing and he's been worried about him. So you've got that all going through all the emotions in this episode. So for any critiques I felt like I was levying, this is still a great episode. This is still, you know, in the top 15 episodes of the show probably overall at this point, and there's been maybe 50, give or take. Like, it's still pretty high up there. It's just we've been spoiled with I mean, you know, I don't want to say perfection, but pretty close to it for a good few episodes at this point. So, you know, the standards have risen a little bit, I guess is what I'm saying. But yeah, the ending in all this is Finch giving basically like a private, you know, hospital room. I don't know if it's in his apartment or maybe it's in Reese's apartment, but in one of the places Finch owns, he's just given Arthur a nice hospital bed. He's got all his monitors and stuff, and his memories coming and going. But Root calls Finch and, you know, says, we were supposed to work together. I wish you trusted me, but I'm on something else now. Which turns out that the bank lady that was in the vault with Fusco, so not Fusco, I keep swapping Fusco and Finch this episode. It was in the vault with Finch and Arthur, right? Which I didn't mention this earlier, but when Vigilance come in like they're bank robbers, even though they're not really there to just rob the bank. I mean, they want to rob one specific thing, I suppose. They want those drives in the vault. But when they come in, the main guy actually shoots the bank lady in the leg, and it felt really vicious. Like, I don't know if you've seen such I mean, it turns out she's actually a spy working for Uncle Nolan, so I guess, like, in the end, it's okay. She's built for this kind of work, but in the moment, it feels like a random bank teller or, like, assistant just got shot in the leg, and it actually feels pretty horrific, and any idea that Vigilance, because they believe in, like, information for the people, like they could be kinda like anti-heroes or good guys, like no, you just shot at what you assumed was a random innocent person because you didn't give a shit. So yeah, Vigilance ain't getting much sympathy from me anytime soon. But she turns out to have been a spy, and it turns out that she swapped the drives. So the drives didn't get destroyed. It was phony drives that got destroyed. And she actually hands off the drives to Uncle Nolan. So he's back in the game and he's all excited about using using his new machine if they can get it up and running, which I assume they're going to. So all that theorizing last episode, I was thinking about, oh, like what if there is like a bad group do get control of a second machine? How do we play with that? Of there being like a villain version of the machine out there? Can it be taught to be good? Like, can the good machine kind of like convince it to switch sides? Is it just evil? Like, all of that theorization for like a lot of this episode, I thought was like, oh, it was fun to think about, but they're not going in that direction. And then it got to this end, and I went, oh no, we are maybe getting like a rival machine. Again, how that'll play out, I don't know, but lots of possibilities. Very fun, excited for it. But Root says she's on that case now. Like she's dealing with where those drives went and whoever's got this idea of a second machine. That is fun. But the sweet part here is that she asked for the phone to be given to Arthur because the machine has something for him. And Arthur takes the phone, and basically the machine has... And this, you know, is right before this conversation as well. Arthur's kind of sad because he, like, every time he comes back and remembers, like, and has like a moment of coherence, like he's forgotten more and more every time. So like he can't remember his wife's eyes color, or you know, a lot of like heartfelt things. Like he feels like all the important stuff is slipping, and it's really sad. And obviously the one big thing the flashbacks in this episode have is like sort of the end of like Finch's father's story, where he goes to the home and doesn't even remember who Finch is anymore. So the one thing I do really like about all that, as my squeaky chair squeaks, is that back in that flashback, in this episode, but also last episode, young Finch said that he was building a machine to help his dad remember. And that was the goal. So there's something really beautiful by the end of this episode where the actual machine that exists does that for Arthur. Arthur is given a video package, effectively. The machine has made a little reel of photographs, of security camera footage of them like celebrating anniversaries or whatever, just anything it could find in the systems that you know are just existing because of all the footage that's collected and whatnot, and gives him a little package to remember his life and his wife. Didn't mean that to rhyme, but there it is. And it's really sweet, but I mean, it's a sweet gesture in and of itself, and it maybe does show that the machine does care about people, right? Again, and we've had evidence of that before, but certainly here, it does feel like the machine is reaching out and giving Arthur something to you know go out on. I think as the phrasing that Root used. But I do love especially that Finch is sitting there and gets to see this, and he basically sees the machine that he built do for Arthur what he was originally trying to build for his father all the way back when he was like 18. I actually think that was a very sweet moment, and I think this idea that Finch is so resistant to seeing the machine as his child, as something he made that is alive, that has feelings and everything else. I think the idea that the machine did this for Arthur is probably something that's nudging the ball to the line where Finch is ready to kind of accept the machine in a way that he hasn't up until this point. And I think that was a good moment. It's kind of... I think the first half of this two-parter was probably a little stronger overall, just in how it balanced everything and the pacing and everything else. I think this emotional send-off here for Arthur is probably the best moment in either episode, though. I think this is the higher high because of that moment. Which is not to say it doesn't have other fun stuff. Of course it does. Reese is a scalpel, Shaw's a hammer, and it's hammer time. Like, you know, there's other things to give some chuckles throughout the episode and good little moments with the various characters. So very curious to see where we take Reese from here, because there's obviously, you know, some soul searching to do. I would be very curious if maybe Reese on his own, like maybe the machine tries to help Reese without anyone else there. That could be interesting, especially if Reese realizes that the machine's like, you know, making a case for itself for him or something. But I'm very curious to see how that progresses based on how he feels this episode. And of course, I mean, when Carter died, the machine was trying to call, and I don't know how much I went into it at the time, but I remember thinking, oh, like the reason why this is such a last minute warning is because when Simmons was coming to kill Carter, it probably wasn't something that he communicated with other people. It wasn't something that was being planned and there's a paper trail or anything like that. It's probably just something that he knows he's going to do in his head, and the only warning the machine got was seeing him on a security camera on the, and going in the direction of where Carter is. It's like that was probably kind of like the only warning the machine got that it was about to happen, and that's why the phone call was so last minute, like I'd say last minute, like it's seconds before it happens. So I think we as the audience can kind of like realize and figure out why the machine didn't give them more of a warning. But that's just to say that there's limits. It's not predicting the future just out of thin air. There has to be premeditation of some kind that has some sort of trail. Whether that's a conversation in front of a security camera, the purchase of a weapon or something, like something. And I'm very curious to see how Reese patches things up with the machine, or better way of putting it, regains faith in the machine. Because keep in mind, back in season 1, like, Reese made that big moment at the end of the season where he just looked up at it and said, "You're going to help me get Finch back." He started thinking of the machine as someone to talk to in that moment. And that was such a big deal for the show. And it kind of, in a lot of ways, representing the audience becoming ready to talk about the machine in that way. It was a pivotal, stepping stone until where we are now. So I'm very curious how the machine and Reese's relationship gets prepared, which is a weird thing to say, but very, very curious. I do hope we see Root. I hope Root has not disappeared now until she's back in New York. I hope we get a little bit more. It seemed like she was somewhere else. It seemed like, I don't know if I got a city necessarily or even a specific country, but it definitely looked maybe like she was in Asia. Just based on all the colorful lights, and I think she had like a ramen bowl in front of her or something. It seemed like it was trying to evoke that type of that part of the planet. So yeah, okay, lots of things to look forward to here. I think it's really interesting that obviously we wrapped up HR, we don't have Carter anymore, but I think it's fascinating that these last few episodes have really left us with a lot of exciting directions to keep going into. Here's to it. We'll see how it goes. So thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Or if you'd rather, you can do YouTube membership, which also helps all the same. But if you got your Patreon, you get all the bonuses for the movie channel as well. So worth having a look into if you're wanting to. But that is me. So thank you very much for joining. Like, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments. All the usual stuff. Thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?